would you react if you heard that your own business spent $400 million on a project only for it to flop 2 weeks later after you've released it to the public?
For the love of God!
Well, according to rumors and apparently insider information, supposedly, Concord cost over $400 million to develop. And the moment this was talked about and brought to attention, the internet went scrambling to find just every bit of information, financial reports, you name it, when it came to how much did Concord actually cost, because in reality, we are never going to know the actual number unless you are literally working at Sony and you are on the board and you get to see all those numbers right there. What's going on, guys? Talle here with Direct Gaming. We got a lot to talk about. If you have not heard already, thanks to Colin Moriarty, he apparently got some insider information when it came to the actual cost of Concord. And again, we've all talked about Concord. We know why it failed and everything, but everyone was kind of speculating that, yeah, this is probably like, 100 million, maybe 200 million at the very most, if you include the actual purchasing of the Firewalk studios and everything like that. But according to his source, again, we don't know exactly if he heard the numbers correctly or if his source heard the correct numbers, who then reported that to Colin and everything like that. But real quickly, I'm not going to play, it's from his podcast and everything. So I'm just going to quickly play a snippet of this. And then I want to get just everyone's personal thoughts and opinions on it, because automatically, like I said, the moment this was talked about and everything, we already started seeing tweets about a timeline right here. Shout out to Detective C's Platinums, a timeline of Concord funding to dispute the $400 million price tag with funding document photos and everything. So real quickly, though, let's just go into the very basic introduction here for this.
Ever talk about this game again? Because who really gives a shit? However, and I don't do journalism really anymore, as you guys know, and we talk about this a lot. I was a journalist at one time, and I used to break a lot of stories, and these days I don't really grind like that. So the stories that I break these days are usually always people coming to me. And someone who worked on Concord reached out to me, and I verified who this person was and went through all of that and talked to this person extensively, for a long time. And got some, I think, interesting information that I can share about Concord. And I think people will be interested about it. The reason that I wanted to talk about it is because some of the assumptions that I had made about the game were dead wrong, as far as how much it cost and how much Sony really lost on it. So the big thing that you really need to know here about this is that Concord cost about $400 million to me.
Okay, so right there, just right off the bat, you hear $400 million and you're thinking to yourself, wait, what? I mean, let's think about this, right? We have games like Ghost of Tsushima that cost around $50 to $60 million. We had games like God of War and Horizon that were around the $200 million. And unfortunately, due to leaks and everything and all that data breach, we found out that Spider-Man 2 cost about $315. I'm still in the boat that probably a good chunk of that money was due to them trying to make that live service section of it with the server infrastructure and everything like that. But regardless, we're getting off topic right there. So to hear that Concord, of all games, it apparently cost $400 million is crazy. Now, if you guys obviously don't know, Concord wasn't just simply made by Sony completely from start to finish or anything like that. It was under a different studio for a while with different funding that was provided there. Sony then acquired the studio making that particular game, and then obviously had to throw money at it to continue, to get it to the end product that we eventually saw. And if you watch the rest of that clip from Colin, he talks about how there's a lot of outsourcing when it came to the kind of final months of the game. Sony outsourced a lot of stuff, which, by the way, outsourcing is not unheard of with any of these companies and everything like that. Like they have their main team working on the main stuff, and then they outsource particular things to other smaller companies. That's normal. Xbox does it. PlayStation does it. Again, everyone does that basically. But again, to hear that $400 million, and so you're thinking to yourself like, okay, so hang on. So X amount of money was spent before Sony picked them up, and then Sony bought them, so that adds on top of that, and then whatever money they spend for marketing and outsourcing, all this other stuff, it's just like, does it really add up to that? And then this is the best one that I could personally find right here. There's also been some other people saying, oh, my sources are telling me this. And then it gets into your typical, well, my source said this, my source said this. And it's just like, okay, whatever, your sources said something. But this is the best one personally that I've personally found, or at least I found on my timeline. And it's from, again, Detective Seeds Platinum. Shout out to him, full credit to him for doing all this stuff. But he talks about how Firewalk was founded back in 2018 under Probably Monsters. Then on October 9th of 2019, the owner, Probably Monsters owner of Firewalk, Battle Barge, and Cauldron Studios received a Series A venture capital investment of $18.8 million spread across these 4 venture capitalists. So basically saying that the $18.8 million initially right here, that did not just all go into Firewalk, aka Concord, that went to whatever these other projects were and everything, right? So it's split across all those. This really jump-started Concord, as well as a studio called Battle Barge, working on a co-op RPG and another unannounced game under Cauldron that is an original adventure game. In 2020, Probably Monsters acquired a PPP loan, as well as unknown amount, couldn't pinpoint exact. On September 1st, 2021, the next Series A investment was awarded to Probably Monsters for $200 million, with the lead investor being LKCM Headwater. No idea who those guys are or anything like that, obviously. In 2022, they had one more round of fundraising, adding an additional $31.2 million and landing at $250 million total raised overall. And then, again, we don't know exactly how it was divided up, so we can only assume initially it was divided amongst, all of these projects evenly, essentially. Was to cover overhead costs of 450 employees and split among 3 active projects within 3 studios. Cauldron, project canceled, in 2023 studio remains open. Battle Barge and Firewalk. At the time, Firewalk had 124 employees of the 450, so that leaves an overhead of 326 between the other studios and Probably Monsters Corporate. April 2023, PlayStation buys Firewalk from Probably Monsters for unknown amount after having a publishing agreement since 2021. So if you don't count operating expenses and divide the projects by 3 equally, you have approximately $85 million per studio just based on the venture capitalists, probably more like $75 million per project. Then PlayStation invests approximately $70 million into the game from dev to marketing and up until the game's release. We get nowhere near $400 million price tag on the game. And then some people have been also noting that their own sources and everything are saying it's closer to 200 in total. That's whatever was under Probably Monsters, Sony buying them, and then Sony, obviously whatever money Sony gave them to finish this project up until its release, essentially. So it's hard to say exactly what the real answer is and everything like that. Again, 400 does seem really high. I don't personally think that Colin would just blatantly make up a number or anything like that. The guy's been in the industry for so long. He was most likely, I don't want to say fed, but given a number that was wrong from whoever told him this. So in my thought process of this is that his source heard a number but heard it wrong or was given false information, but then potentially, and then that guy told Colin, and then Colin let it out to the internet, essentially, like you'd expect him to and everything like that. So I would be interested to see this as a side note if Colin comes back later on and says like, so it turns out my source was fired because he gave him false information. They were trying to weed out the the people like that and everything. But regardless, it is, regardless of what the actual total is in the end, this is still a giant flop for PlayStation. And it just goes to show that things are going to get worse probably before they get better. It's an interesting situation to be in.
200, 400, doesn't matter. The game got shut down within days. To be the eternal contrarian that I usually am, I see no reason why it couldn't be 400. I mean, everyone's spouting all kinds of ridiculous numbers out. Big numbers that the human mind can't fathom going down the toilet. It could go either way. 200 or 400, I think it's a huge number going down the toilet for a game that really didn't pan out. The problem is the video game industry is the biggest entertainment industry at this point, and the notion of Hollywood math and accounting not finding its way into video games would be surprising, and all kinds of crazy shit goes down in Hollywood accounting. So it would not surprise me if it got up to 400, but wasn't on the books. A lot of it was on the table, I'm sure. But I think at the end of the day, this is a humongous flop. 200 or 400, it's going to look really bad in the books. The stocks for Sony are not going to look great because of this, and it's not looking good. I'm erring on the side of 400 just because I think it's a juicier number. But I think it's an absurd number. I think it's probably closer to 2 or 3.
Well, and we don't know. Again, the only thing that we don't know is simply when it was back at probably Monsters, how much it was really being distributed. It's not going to make, I think, a huge difference or anything like that, but it could potentially push those numbers. Maybe, I know, let's just say in the middle, 300 million. You still, if anyone doesn't think, oh yeah, 300 million is not that bad, but then 400 is bad, it's just like,
yeah, I mean, it's diminishing returns.
Exactly.
Sure.
In that particular line of business, and when you're dealing with multiple millions of dollars and everything, that's minuscule. Plus, I mean, if we look at other games that have cost a lot of money, I'm pretty sure Red Dead 2 cost 400, maybe 500, which I could easily see that with all the mocaps and everything like that. Halo Infinite was notorious for having a $500 million budget and everything, so it wouldn't surprise me if they did have 400 million in the end after everything's calculated and everything. Not to mention, if I remember correctly, Firewalk is in Bellevue, Washington, of all places. Like, that's not cheap. That is not cheap.
That's a terrible place.
Yeah, that is
terrible place to make a development shop.
And I thought I saw that they actually made a new studio. Like, it wasn't huge or anything, but they made a new studio there in Bellevue, Washington. And then you're paying 150 people, probably making 6 figures would be my guess, to work in Bellevue. Like,
yeah, Bellevue, Washington.
Jeez, and this is coming from a guy who grew up in Seattle. Like, it's not cheap. It is not cheap.
Sucker Punch is out of Bellevue. I think 2 are close by.
Sucker Punch, I believe, is in, they're downtown Seattle, if I remember correctly. Last I checked, at least. Bungie is in Bellevue, if I remember correctly. Like,
Sucker Punch is in Bellevue also.
Oh, they are?
So
okay.
They can literally have gone across the street and asked them, hey, guys, any tips for launching a game successfully?
Yeah, seriously. So, I mean, and it's not even just, Bellevue's not even, the only bad place to have a thing. I mean, a lot of these Western development areas are all within, San Francisco, LA. Coast. Like, they're all in the most expensive cities, which, again, makes sense because that would theoretically, that draws the most.
Nah, go to Kansas. Go to Kansas.
Yeah. I'm sure Clark Kent would love to work with Xbox or Sony.
There you go. Save some money.
With this whole thing, what I think happened, honestly, is Colin was like, okay, so like, how much did the game cost? And whoever the source was like, well, like 400. And he was like, oh my God, 400 million. Hold on, I gotta go make a video. We gotta go to the podcast. And then he hung up, and the intern was like, no, it was like $400, Colin. Sorry. $400. Like Concord's budget, there's no way it was $400 million. Like, I know mocap is expensive and they use some real high-tech shit, but they also are using Unreal 5, which is supposed to drop costs and difficulty in doing that. That's a big selling point for Unreal 5, is that you can do that mocap stuff super fast and super, like, cheap compared to traditional ways of doing it, because of all the rendering tech that's in it. That was like that big Hellblade presentation like last year or 2 years ago. That's what it was all about. It was like, hey, we can take and process these mocap facial things in like 6 minutes and get it into the game.
Right. Plus with that particular game, there's not that much voice acting and everything as well, right? Like if you want to compare it to, a big huge game like Horizon or something like that, right? That had a ton of voice acting, mocap, the whole 9 yards. Concord, while they most likely they probably had some stuff saved up for their weekly story stuff or anything, it's not even close to probably reaching that same level of the amount that they had to do and everything. So, but the biggest thing to take away, regardless of the number, right? The number is huge regardless. The biggest thing, though, that I personally took away from it, and that a lot of others have confirmed, is the whole toxic positivity aspect in the company, where you were basically not allowed to say anything negative or any concerns about the game. Be like, are we sure we want to be doing that?
Are you sure about that?
Right?
Yeah, that's one of the things
that is one of the things that's like, okay.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's not okay, right? And I mean, how many times, like, we run a small little YouTube channel business here, there have been a number of times where Talle and I have had to talk the other like off the cliff of like, hey, you sure that's a good idea?
Right.
Because like we're here to help each other and give each other that criticism.
Right.
Like, hey, we should think about this before we invest a ton of time, money into doing something like this that may not work. Exactly. And so like we'll step back and look at it. Like, and if you don't have that on any sort of creative project, like
it's not good.
It's not good. Like you just end up with shit because there's no one telling you, hey, like this vision, whatever vision you've got here, it's just like kind of doesn't make sense. Like I'm not, you have to, as a creative, be willing to take that, right? Like, I am very grateful. Like when I did a score for a movie, it was a friend of mine, his movie, and it was like his college senior thesis, right? So I did the score for it, and like I'm very traditional, so I did like a very traditional style score, and he loved that. But there's some times where he'd just be like, I don't like what this piece is, and so we had to work together a lot to get what he wanted because it was his movie, right? And I had to be willing to have him go like I'd put something together, and he'd be like, I don't really think that's what I want. And be like, okay, well I worked like 8 hours on this.
It's also one of those things I think where there's a difference between constructive criticism and someone blatantly just saying this is a piece of shit product that you've made for me, get this out of my sight type of thing, because people have to realize that these companies they're not having people from Twitter and everything come in and gauge their game and everything like that. Like, so again, a much smaller example, but again, when Bobby and I, quote unquote, talk each other off, keep each other from doing particular things and everything like that, I'm not yelling at him or he's not yelling at me being like, dude, this is the biggest piece of garbage idea you've ever had or anything like that. It's like, look, does this make sense and everything? All right. Like I get you like the topic or anything, or I get you like this, but does this make sense and everything? And as someone in a creative area like this, whether it's music or YouTube or anything, you have to be willing to look at some constructive criticisms and look, okay, let's take a quick step back real quick. Does this make sense? And if maybe there's a way you can modify it, right, to then fit or not waste as much money or anything like that, then by all means, we'll go ahead and do that. But clearly here with Concord, that does not seem to be the case, which unfortunately then starts to just give me flashbacks of things like BioWare and Anthem, and anytime you hear the insert company name and magic, because we're too good to fail because we've done this success stuff in the past.
I don't know. I feel like it would have changed a lot is if they had taken some of that criticism. And one thing that I noticed people said is they showed some like concept art. It was very stylized, very like anime style. And people were like, why didn't the game look like this? I was like, I'd be interested in this. And it's true, because like you think about like some of those character designs, like those character designs are kind of weird, some of them, but in anime style, you might be able to make them work better.
In any game, it's all about, not all of that, but it's part of it is how visually appealing it can be to some people, right? The reason people like a game like Overwatch, as much crap as I still give it, is that people can really like a particular character. They latch onto that and they're like, this person looks, sexy. They look buff. They look cool. They look whatever. Insert adjective here, essentially, right? And with all the, different types of characters and everything and the way they look, that's what draws people to that game and everything. And it's worked out for them. Whereas with Concord, there's a good chunk of them that are just like so basic, and it's like they kind of look like normal people, essentially. It's just like that doesn't really do anything.
It's generic.
It is. It's very generic.
The problem with all of this is that you guys were mentioning just about, creatives collaborating, constructive feedback. That doesn't apply when your senior leadership is very into an idea.
Yeah.
It could be literally torpedoing the fucking company. You can't say no to them. Because
Game Pass. I'm sorry.
No, Game Pass was a great idea about 7-ish years ago. The problem is no one decided to take a litmus test and see if it's still a good idea.
We'll talk more about that in the next video, or one of the next videos we're recording.
So make sure you check out the top right corner for the videos and sub to the channel.
Exactly. Yeah,
But
you can't see no leadership. That's the problem. And so
that is a problem
with Concord. I think because a certain super duper high level person who used to work at Guerrilla really liked the game and called it the next Star Wars and invested entirely too much into it, not money wise, but just into different
I think
brand synergies.
I think the beginning of it started with Jim Ryan, and at that time, the current CEO was still at a pretty high position, so he probably had some input. But a lot of this started obviously with Jim Ryan's push into live service stuff. He most likely got kicked out. The more I'm looking at this, personally, at least in my opinion, that's still my tinfoil hat theory. But the new CEO that come in, remember, so PlayStation now has two CEOs, one that works with hardware, one that works with the software side. So the software side is your games, hardware is, again, PlayStation 5 Pro and all that stuff. But he did not, the moment he became CEO, he did not say, hey, cut this off at the head and let's go back to what, our customers like. He tried to champion it, and it's definitely failed now. And now we're seeing, I would not be surprised if he's going to be pushing so hard for that Horizon live service game. Because, shocker, he was one of the founders of Guerrilla Games. He made Horizon, all that stuff. It's not rocket science or anything like that. So,
and it's going to launch against Elden Ring 2 or something.
Oh God. No, it's gonna launch like a month before Monster Hunter, the new Monster Hunter coming out.